Hello, hello. Welcome back to the P2P Soap Box. I'm your host and your P2P BFF, Marcie Maxwell. One trend we're hearing across our industry is that organizations are placing a renewed emphasis on major gift fundraising, leaving those of us in the peer-to-peer world wondering, what does this mean for our P2P campaigns? But here's a better question. What happens when you stop treating major gifts and peer-to-peer as competing channels at the opposite end of the spectrum and start seeing them as collaborative partners? Too many organizations let these teams operate in silos, missing opportunities to amplify each other's success and create deeper, more meaningful donor relationships. Today, I'm joined by Jamie Lamont, Vice President of Events at the Sinai Health Foundation. The Sinai Health Foundation funds transformative care across Sinai Health, a leading academic health science center in Toronto, serving patients across the continuum of life, from prenatal care to aging and chronic illness. While many healthcare organizations treat major gifts and peer-to-peer as separate worlds, Sinai Health Foundation has cracked the code on integration. Jamie's team has discovered how events and community fundraising provide invaluable intelligence that enhances major gift strategies, and how major donor cultivation can elevate their peer-to-peer outcomes. From breaking down internal competition to creating genuine partnerships between teams, Jamie shares practical strategies today for ensuring all your fundraising efforts ladder up to mission-driven priorities and serve donors holistically. Because your donors don't see silos, they see one organization that they want to support. So let's jump right in to my conversation with Sinai Health Foundation's Jamie Lamont. Jamie, welcome to the P2P Soap Box. So happy to have you.
Thanks, Marcie. Very happy to be here. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
I love it. I love it. One of my many Canadian guests that are joining us this season. So, Jamie, let's start with just your professional and personal journey that led you to your role at Sinai Health Foundation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've kind of taken a roundabout way of getting here. Not the traditional fundraising experience, but I think over the years that came to light, but, kind of the marketing communications roles at a couple of different agencies, and where I started to work with healthcare organizations and pharmaceutical companies, planning large events, and events have kind of always been in my bailiwick a little bit, but I think we've kind of around 2013, I'd worked on a number of large fundraising events for different hospitals here in Toronto. And I think the calling was there. I think it was time for me to kind of switch gears and step out of the agency world and into the world of fundraising specifically, because I just found it kind of interesting and challenging at the same time. And I worked at a hospital foundation here in Toronto called Sunnybrook Foundation, large trauma center here in Toronto. Had some great experiences there. Ran some really huge events, a very large running event called the RBC Race for the Kids, which is now, I think it takes place in 5 countries around the world and raises a lot of money for youth mental health. And from there, I actually joined Sinai Health Foundation for a few years as their director of events. And yeah, Sinai Health Foundation launched a large fundraising walk for women's and infants because we are the largest birthing hospital in Canada. 7,000 babies a year are born here. And from Sinai Health Foundation, I went on to a 7 to 8 year career at Sick Kids Foundation here in Toronto, which I'm sure most people will be familiar with, where we ran quite a few peer-to-peer programs, and a lot of them appear in the top 30 in the peer-to-peer annual rankings for Canada. And just had a really great time developing programs, growing programs there. And then about 2 years ago, I got a phone call from Sinai Health looking for someone who would step into the role of vice president of events at the foundation there. And I just I thought about it and went through a number of interviews and thought this would be a great place to settle in and help grow a program again. So here I am, 2 years in at Sinai Health Foundation and loving every minute of it.
I love it. I always love hearing kind of how people took their journey to getting in fundraising. So for listeners who might not be super familiar with Sinai Health, can you just give us a quick overview of kind of what types of peer-to-peer events, what your portfolio looks like?
Yeah, sure. We are, we're, I would say, a standard general hospital organization here in Toronto. We have the good fortune of having many great hospital properties within the city, and we are a teaching hospital. And our largest programs are going to be women's and infants. Again, as I said, with the number of high-risk births that we do, we have a large neonatal intensive care unit. We're very well known for our IBD clinic. It's one of the top in the world. We do a ton of research here. So the Lunenfeld Tannenbaum Research Institute is a massive institute, which produces some really great bench science, but also clinical research science as well. We are very active as a foundation in supporting the efforts of the hospital. The Canadian kind of funding model is a little bit different than in the US, which has its good points, but also it has its challenges too. But we do raise. As a foundation, we raise about $100 million a year in support of the hospital and its programming. For the American audience who might not know, our hospital healthcare system here is funded by public dollars, so it is through taxes through the different provinces here in Canada. That usually goes towards operating costs for the hospital and kind of keeping the lights on, as I would call it. Whereas a lot of the operational costs in terms of capital expenses and things come from private donations. So that's where our whole kind of fundraising efforts go towards, raising money for these critical programs, supporting programs, MRIs, things like that need to be purchased for the hospital, and we're responsible for that. So we've developed an events program over the years that has allowed us to, take a look at what we do and how we do it and what makes the most sense for us. I would say we're not the most peer-to-peer driven organization, just based on our donor base and their kind of way they want to play with us. But we do have a couple of peer-to-peer events or peer-to-peer based events. One is what we call Raptors to Research. So in partnership with the Toronto Raptors basketball team here in Toronto, we put on a large 3-on-3 basketball tournament. It's been running for 3 years now, raising just under $1 million through that. And that's kind of growing every year. It's grown. So we're shooting for over $1 million next year. And maybe I'll make that top 30 again in Canada. And, we've got a couple of other events that kind of touch on the peer-to-peer side of things. Launching a new event this year called Sinai Showdown, which is kind of an interesting one. It's based in kind of the game show Family Feud concept, and we're challenging 6 of our donor families to sign up, fundraise, and compete to win a purse of $250,000 for their area of care that they choose. So that'll be launching in November. So that kind of plays on the peer-to-peer world there. But I think we really look at that peer-to-peer experience that I've brought to the team and trying to figure out how do we take the best learnings from that and build it into our overall events program.
It's so interesting to kind of hear where you are in the process. So many hospitals historically have been, major gift shops. That's where everything is heavily focused. And I think I often hear from our peer-to-peer peers in the hospital space that sometimes the internal team struggles to see the benefit of peer-to-peer or how that can fit. So what is your vision for how that fits into kind of the overall philanthropic strategy that is so major gifts focused at Sinai Health?
it's one of those relationships that I think develops just based on the people who are around the table. And I think for us as a senior leadership team, we're looking at the idea of, we have this opportunity to engage people in different ways. And it just happens that at Sinai Health, our donor base really likes events. They really do. They enjoy kind of the coming together and the sharing of experiences and, I think the fun of it too. So, I think when we look at our overall fundraising strategy, events definitely plays a big role in that. And it's in our strategic plan for the foundation. And so, we as we kind of build that strategy out, when it comes to kind of a year's planning session, we will look at, okay, so we have this, what opportunities would we have to engage this major gift audience in an event setting that would allow for either further cultivation or, launching new opportunities. And so we have a lot of those conversations around the executive table to figure out how do we best fit. So it's not just, we're just not putting an event out there. It's very much, we've thought about why this event is going to exist and how it's going to fit into the ecosystem of what we're building.
Yeah. And I think it's an interesting approach because I think so often, peer-to-peer is thought of as just to acquire new donors. Right. And that's true. That's always going to be a piece of it. It's the front porch to the organization. But also, I think, we assume somebody's written the check. And so they never want to come to an event ever again. And we kind of put them in that box instead of thinking like, what could peer-to-peer look like to appeal to some donors we already have? And whether they give again, whether they give more, whether they introduce us to 15 more people who have the capacity to give. So I think it's an interesting approach. What I think often stops people is that internal collaboration, right? There's always the feeling of, well, they're my donors instead of the organization's donors. So how are your teams, even beyond just the executive leadership table, like how are you seeing those two teams work together to kind of come up with these successful plans? Like how do they benefit each other?
Yeah, no, great question. I think I learned through my years at Sick Kids that we would create these core group of organization teams. So and kind of have a representative from the major groups within the foundation to kind of build an event. So starting from the ground up, it wasn't just the events team ideating and then developing and then launching this thing. It was very much a collaboratory way of building an event process. And I think that really has transitioned very well, to Sinai Health as well. We definitely engage early on in the process, even in the ideation stage. I held an events ideation session last January with an outside mediator and basically had them come in and help us kind of figure out who we are and why, what we were doing and why. And we had people from Major Gifts, we had people from our donor experience team, from finance. Like we brought everybody together to kind of share their ideas and opinions and then kind of crafted out, 3 or 4 workable strategies that we could take forward from there. So for us, it was very much about, getting people in early so that we had buy-in right from the beginning. And I think that has kind of proven to be a very successful strategy for us.
What have you learned about your donors through that? Like, have you seen how they're showing up and what they're interested in?
Yeah, for sure. So I've stolen the kind of the P2P moniker, and I now call it pay to play. So we have our peer-to-peer group, and then we have our pay-to-play group. So we definitely have a mix of those, but I would say at Sinai Health Foundation, where our donor community really seems to be they like to pay to play. So they would rather, either write a check or, maybe do a little bit of fundraising, but they're very much, this is a great experience. I'll just pay and play rather than speak to the larger group. So that can be challenging, but that allows us then opportunities to develop event concepts that might work for that kind of way of thinking. So I'm not necessarily going out and planning a brand new, massive walk for Sinai, because I know that's probably not going to be, at the end of the day, successful. It'll be fun, it'll be well organized, but it might not hit the financial goals we're looking for. So why don't we create a concept that actually is going to play to the strengths of our donor base, and that's how we play that way.
So can you give me some examples of some types of things you've kind of created with that pay to play in mind?
Yeah, for sure. I think going back to that example of the Sinai Showdown event, it's very much a pay to play event. So the way we structured that was knowing that we needed to raise. So our goal is $1 million. That's how much we want to raise. So what we kind of set out was, in order for a family or a group of friends to participate in this event, it's going to cost $50,000. So they need to pay that as their entry fee. So think of that as their registration fee. However they do that, wherever, we'll take the money. The remainder of the commitment is that they need to raise an additional $150,000 each team. So whether they are going to go and ask others for money, or how we structured the sales kind of I don't want to call it sponsorship kind of guide, but more kind of the sales piece of this event. Sure. Is that we've set up different levels of price points for access to the event. So if you wanted a table at our event and you want us prime seating and you want a table for 10, you can sponsor or donate 50,000 at this level, and this is what you get. Or at 25, you get this. And it goes down to, I think, 2,500, and this is what you get. You get dinner, or you get you get access to the VIP lounge or whatever that is, and then the show as it exists. So, we've tried to build it so that it has that peer-to-peer flavor to it, because they're going to go out and ask their friends or companies or vendors that they work with to sponsor them in that way. But also it has that pay to play element where they could potentially write us a check for $150,000. That'd be really nice.
That'd be really nice. Well, it reminds me of kind of the marathon space where people have, a bib and it's 3,000, 5,000, 7,000 to kind of earn your bib. There are always going to be people who just say, I just want to write the check. And I've never studied the psychology of that. I actually, if I was a psychologist, or call out to anybody who's listening of what makes somebody write a check versus raise it. It's not just ability or a pocketbook, but I don't know what that answer is. But it reminds me of that. And there's always been a place for that in peer-to-peer. I mean, I think that's never the majority, or rarely the majority. But there's always been kind of those exceptional support or exceptions to the rule, whether their company says we're just going to fund it completely or I can personally fund it completely. How does that change kind of how you message them about the event and about fundraising and about your mission? Do you still kind of push them to fundraise even if they've, Yeah.
Because I think that taking those learnings from that peer-to-peer world, we definitely apply it here too. I think because our goal, obviously, at the end of the day, is raise as much money as possible. So if we can push them over that $150,000 goal, which sounds kind of crazy, but I think that they're still getting the coaching. They're still, they have personal web pages that they can fundraise through. It's still an internal competition between those 6 families. They're on the leaderboard. They see where they stand, and when you get into this core group of people who are not used to losing, I'm sure, there's going to be some of that lovely competition happening, which is great strategy for us, right? If we had a conversation this morning with one of our families that will be participating. They've already upped their goal by 100,000. So, that is music to my ears. That's exactly what I want to see happen here. And I think, it's year one of the event, so we'll see what happens. But I think, that peer-to-peer philosophy and strategy is still existing, even if it's pay to play.
Yeah. And I love the piece about competition. I was just having this conversation with somebody about, the only people that really care about competition for the leaderboard are the 5 or 6 people that are already on the leaderboard. And so, we're kind of talking about different messaging for different levels of fundraising. But when you've got kind of a niche group, if there's only 6 teams, you don't want to come in 6th place, and it's, as I'm sure that will naturally drive a little bit of I would imagine, the above and beyond.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So, yeah. Egos play. I like that.
Well, so I know we've also talked about, I think, when it comes to major donors, there's always so much focus on, the connection to the mission and, what they're looking to support. How are you making sure that kind of that event strategy kind of ladders up to your mission priorities, your donor priorities, both in terms of kind of your messaging, but also the audiences that you're kind of building these programs for?
Yeah. And I think a lot of that comes through that collaborative approach to building the event concept too. So, we're making sure that, yes, one, we're sticking to the strategic plan of the foundation. 2, we have a plan for the event and how the different pieces are going to fit into that plan. It's easier said than done in some cases, but I think really, like, if you start from the idea that, we can build this and they will come, like it's done in that strategic way with people around the table that are expressing different opinions and different objectives, because, events people, we think one way, and major gifts people think a very different way sometimes.
What?
But I know it's I know it's surprising. I know. Sorry to shock everybody with that news, but no, I think the more we can collaborate together and work on a coexisting strategy, I think that's going to be crucial to success for people. Because I think what happens in a lot of organizations is one does the other, and then it just becomes a battle to the end. And that's when you get they're my donors or whatever. But we're trying to erase those lines or those silos within our group, and so far so good.
So what else is on your radar as you're still coming into this role at Sinai Health when it comes to growing your peer-to-peers? You've got some new events, some collaboration with major gifts. Kind of what else is on the horizon for you?
Yeah,
what do you hope for?
Yeah, there's lots of hopes. I'm trying to figure out a way of growing this portfolio so that we're not the same as everybody else, because of what we're challenged with here in Toronto is we've got as I said at the beginning, we've got a lot of hospital properties within, and they're amazing. All of them are amazing in their own worlds. And we're not competitors, but there's only so many people that can support different causes. And, and there's lots of different really cool event ideas here in Toronto. And, so for us, looking at, different ways of doing it, definitely I use the RX&D method, the rip off and duplicate method, where it makes sense, so looking at different event properties around and say, hey, that's a great idea. How do we make this our own? You see some really great examples out of the US. You see some amazing examples out of the UK and out of Australia. I think I've had the kind of the pleasure of working with different organizations and different vendors across the globe and seeing kind of how they think about things and how do I work that into that overall strategy. So, it's kind of fun. Like, it's like I try and build ideas that are unique enough that people kind of go, what is that? And then they get it. And so, it provides a little bit of a different take on how to do this through event fundraising.
Yep. So I'll ask you kind of one last question. If there's somebody listening at home or on their walk and they're thinking, what could I do in the peer-to-peer space to better either engage our major gift donors or engage our major gift team internally? What kind of advice would you give them?
Yeah. I think from, engaging the major gift people from inside your organization, because they're the ones that know those donors intimately. In a lot of cases, like having their ear from the beginning is very crucial. And, they're not always going to agree with what, because we're the events people. So we kind of think up some crazy ideas, but they're also looking for new touch points too, and how to get into having a conversation. So I'll give you an example. We created an event. We call it Destination Dinner. It kind of stemmed out of a whole kind of culinary event idea that we had a number of years ago. But now these dinners, we call it, they're always on dinners. So we basically work very closely with our major gift philanthropy people to say, hey, listen, here's an opportunity for you to go to a donor and say, in a not so typical way, why don't you host a dinner either at your home or at a restaurant, where you name it, you develop whatever that idea is, work with whatever chef you want. We'll kind of help you on the fundraising side, but the idea is to engage a new pool of donors that, that major gift person can help bring to the table, literally. And, we've seen really good success with this, so sometimes you have to create those opportunities for the major gift people, because not every walk, run, or ride is going to work in that way. Sometimes they do. I know we've got a lot of great major gift people that participate in those things, but I think sometimes they're looking for a different experience out of a foundation. So, that's just kind of a simple idea. But having those conversations. Yeah.
Well, I think sometimes it can start as simply, if you've already got a large peer-to-peer program, it's just, I can think of times in my past where it was simply going to the major gifts team and saying, can you invite 3 of your donors to walk with you at the walk in September? And just, it's an introduction. It's that extra touch point. So how do you use the events? How can peer-to-peer help your major gifts team? And I think then it becomes a lot easier to then flip that conversation and say, how can major gifts help events? And, is it introducing to potential volunteer leaders? Is it introducing to this major donor also has a company that could potentially sponsor? And I think creating that, two-way street, I think, again, the early conversations is really key, but it can start as simple as saying, please bring your people to this event. We're maybe, we're going to be soft on our fundraising ask, but we want them to come see it, experience the mission in person. So I think it's a partnership that can really thrive. I know I've worked at organizations where that was the case. I've also worked at places where it was a little bit more of a battle. And so I think there's so many organizations that are renewing their focus on major gifts, or frankly, just kind of starting their focus on major gifts, which is a flip from a lot of hospitals. And so I think, it's going to be interesting to watch kind of how that evolves in the industry.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, again, if you're just starting out, kind of combining the two, just have a lot of great conversations around the table. Because I think there's a lot of great ideas that can come out of those conversations for all parties involved, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, Jamie, if there are people that are listening that want to kind of learn more about what y'all have going on at Sinai, where can we send them? We always like to drop links in our show notes.
Yeah. Probably the website's probably the easiest, Sinai Health Foundation.ca. That has an events page on there, but also they can reach out to me anytime. Awesome. Happy to share.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to watch the success of your new showdown event and see what happens. And hopefully we'll see it in the Canadian top 30, if not for 2025 and 2026. And it'll just keep growing.
Let's fingers crossed. But
fingers crossed. All right. Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks, Marcie.
The P2P Soap Box is produced in partnership with True Story FM. Engineering by Pete Wright. Music this week is by Balloon Planet. If your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, we hope you'll consider doing just that for our show. But the best thing you can do to support the P2P Soap Box is simply to share the show with a friend or colleague. Thank you for listening.